So this video is going to be part two of the first video I made, which was the other day, what led me to attract toxic relationships. The first video explored basically the dynamic, which is the theme of boundaries, right? Either boundarylessness, meaning no boundaries at all whatsoever, or permeable boundaries, right? So the dynamic of either boundarylessness or permeable boundaried um, dynamics between uh, or themes between people is very fascinating, and the way that I've experienced it throughout my entire life in relationships. And when I say this in terms of relationships, I'm not just referring to romantic, I'm referring to platonic, I'm referring to every experience that I've had with every individual I've come in contact with. Um, Let me just say this real quick to make this very clear. When you don't learn healthy boundaries, you don't attract people with healthy boundaries. When you learn permeable boundaries or dynamics of boundarylessness in relationships, um, you're going to attract that. Whatever it is that you learn, you'll attract. If you learn, and this is a big one for a lot of people, if you learn that money is the root of all evil, you're going to experience a life based on that. You're going to experience financial dynamics where probably you don't like money, probably you hate money, probably you push money away from you, right? Your relationship to money is distorted based on that view that you hold, right? But let's get into the dynamic of what it's like being in a relationship with somebody who either is boundaryless, boundaryless, there you go, meaning they don't have boundaries. And this is kind of the thing that happens when personality disorders come into play. You might see this with like NPD, right? Narcissistic personality disorder. They lack a sense of self, and therefore, with that, they're incapable of boundaries, right? Because in order to have boundaries, you need to have a static, established sense of self. But other than that, there's also permeable boundaries, right? And excuse the microphone knock there. Um, there's also permeable boundaries, right? And so, like, again, when it comes to the toxicity, the reason why there is toxicity present, let me just make sure all right, we're good. The reason why there is toxicity present in the relationship, right? In regards to either boundarylessness or permeable boundaries, is because essentially there's no established boundary, right? There's no clear distinction between, or I should also say, clear differentiation between self and other. So it's like your shit is my shit and my shit is your shit, even though that's not really the case. That only happens when somebody has either permeable boundaries or no boundaries present at all whatsoever. So you end up taking on a lot of the other person's shit usually. Um, you would find yourself in a relationship like this with somebody if you learned over responsibility. Again, permeable boundaries, boundarylessness, where you begin, where you end, where the other person begins, where they end, right? Um, what is your stuff? What is not your stuff? What is your responsibility to take on? What is not your responsibility to take on? People that are healthy, they take their stuff on themselves and they deal with their stuff on themselves. They're not like, here's my shit and it's your stuff, it's yours to deal with, right? No, they're like, yeah, all of my stuff is in a box right here and I'm capable of taking care of that. If I need to talk to a professional, then I'll do that. But that's how they deal with their stuff. um, Toxic relationships where there are permeable boundaries or boundarylessness altogether, they lack that. They literally, and I've experienced this. No names, but I've experienced it where like there's no clear sense of differentiation between self and other. Right? Maybe I'm expected to be the external regulator of a person, emotional regulator, right? Emotional caretaker. Um, because there is emotional immaturity at play in the other individual, and they are incapable of, to a very large degree, self-regulating, and that's a problem. In healthy relationships, that doesn't occur. Both people have the capacity to individually self-regulate, and they can take care of themselves on that behalf in a very necessary and healthy way and manner. That's just the way that it is. Um, but if you're in a relationship with somebody and it's toxic, it's likely that you're being projected on, right? They're taking their shit and they're throwing it at you. Um, Maybe you're being displaced onto as well. Displacement is similar to projections, but like for instance, displacement as an example is you know, if somebody's telling you about an experience that they went through in the past or something that they did, or maybe they were with a person and they stayed with that person and that person treated them like crap, right? And they stayed with the person and stayed with the person, right? You might look at that scenario and you might be like, but how could you have done that to yourself, right? You could have left. Why did you stay? I just don't understand why you stayed. I don't understand how you could have stayed. I don't understand why you did that to yourself. What makes that displacement, say for instance on my end, I've had experience with this. No names again, but what makes that displacement is that you're looking at the other person's life, but you're also, I think it's either subconsciously or unconsciously realizing that you have found yourself in an experience with somebody where you at some point maybe reflected and you were like, I can't believe I stayed with that person, right? Like obviously it was so clearly unhealthy and it was a fucked up dynamic and everything, right? And so maybe it's too uncomfortable for you to look at yourself it's too uncomfortable for you to look at yourself, so the defense mechanism becomes displacement. You're taking your shit and you're displacing it onto them. That's why it's kind of similar to projections, because you're also kind of like taking your shit and projecting it onto them. But there's a lot of that in unhealthy relationships. There are just not healthy boundaries, and because of that, um, there's no sense of clear understanding of like self and other, my stuff, your stuff. You deal with your stuff, I deal with my stuff. Um, and that's just the way that it is. Toxic relationships are toxic because they lack healthy boundaries, and because they lack healthy boundaries, you're going to find things like projections and displacements and this, that, and the other. Um, and I'm seeing dynamics like crazy. Like even being out of relationships, like I'm seeing dynamics like crazy, like left and right. And the coolest part about this point in my life, when before I used to really like inject myself or like put myself into the situations and try to like you know caretake. Now I'm just observing, and it's such a fascinating thing to watch. Um, just like everything unfold. It really is. It's absolutely fascinating. Another thing that's fascinating too, which is also a defense mechanism, reaction formation. Such a fascinating thing. What it is basically when you actually like or love something, but you pretend that you dislike or hate it, right? And you actually communicate the, like for instance, like um, maybe just as an example, maybe you think that sex is bad or that it's evil, right? But you really love it, and for whatever reason, you've learned to utilize this defense mechanism of reaction formation. So you're basically communicating the opposite of what it is that you feel, right? Sex is bad. Sex is evil. No, it's not. It's not. It's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's none of that stuff. That's black or white thinking, emotional immaturity. Um, but you might hold that belief and be actually different about it, be obsessed with it, love it. It's fascinating, it really is. So in terms of toxicity in relationships, and how I've experienced things with people, I've experienced a crap ton of projections. um, I'll end off with this note because I think that this is really important to understand. Um, I believe, and also based on what I've experienced, there is a very specific level of conscious awareness, self awareness that needs to take place in order for an individual to not get sucked into things like, projections and displacements and, all these different defense mechanisms that people utilize, um, to defend against pain, right? Um, if you are not aware of your shit and somebody projects their shit onto you, the likelihood that you're going to carry that with you and identify with it is rather high, you know? And that is the benefit of self awareness. That's the benefit of bringing the unconscious and the subconscious into the light of conscious awareness. Knowing who you are, knowing what it is that you are, understanding what it is that happened to you, knowing your shit, knowing the difference between self and other, knowing the difference between your shit and another person's shit, understanding that it's not your responsibility to emotionally caretake other people, understanding that it's not your responsibility. This is a massive one. I've been here many times. Understanding that it's not your responsibility to be an emotional punching bag for anybody. Right? Just because somebody has shit, we all do, no one's exempt from it. Just because someone has shit doesn't mean, and you're in a relationship with them, and you love them and you care about them, doesn't mean that it's your responsibility to take the fucking punches of their pain. That's another sign of toxicity in relationships. I've been there before. Um, but yeah, this was really more so just diving into the dynamics of toxicity in relationships. If you did not learn, I'll seriously end off with this. If you did not learn healthy boundaries, um, and really have that secured in your habitual behavior on a daily basis, the likelihood that you will end up in a relationship with somebody that projects and displaces and uses other defense mechanisms to defend against the pain of their own shit is very high because you lack healthy boundaries. You have permeable boundaries. Maybe you're boundaryless. Maybe, I don't know, but the likelihood that you'll find yourself in, toxicity and everything with somebody else is pretty high. And it's not fun. I actually used to believe that this is just the way that relationships are supposed to be, that they are that way, that you have to learn to take punches from people. Um, I was so inaccurate about that. And I had multiple people in my life like reinforcing me, or reinforcing my belief that that is what it is that I deserve, and this, that, and the other, and it's not. There is a clear distinction between healthy relationships and unhealthy or toxic relationships, and one of the biggest distinctions here that I made clear in the first video is boundaries, right? The likelihood that you'll end up in a toxic, abusive, unhealthy relationship, if you learned permeable boundaries or boundarylessness altogether, is very high. The likelihood that you'll end up in a healthy relationship with healthy boundaries and a healthy individual, if you learned healthy boundaries, is very high. Whatever it is that you learned is what it is that you're likely to experience, and it's just as simple as that.